Welcome back to The Observable Unknown. Ask two siblings about the same childhood, and you may hear about two different homes. One remembers warmth, the other remembers tension. A parent seems protective in one account and completely unpredictable in the other. Neither person has to be lying. They may simply be remembering. We often speak of memory as though the mind were an archive. Something happens, it's recorded, and years later we retrieve the file. But remembering is closer to reconstruction. We rebuild the past from fragments, emotion, later knowledge, and the person we've become since the event occurred. Memory doesn't merely preserve identity, it keeps editing identity into continuity. Endel Tulving helped distinguish between two forms of memory that often travel together. Semantic memory allows you to know. You know where you were born, what year an event occurred, or what a word means, even if you can't recall when you learned it. Episodic memory allows you to remember yourself inside an event. You don't simply know that a birthday happened. You partly return to the room. You see the cake, hear the voices, and remember who you believed yourself to be at that time. Tulving linked episodic memory with what he called autonoetic consciousness, the experience of oneself moving through subjective time. That distinction is important because identity depends upon much more than facts. A biography can tell me where you lived. Memory tells you what it felt like to be the person living there. But that continuity is not fixed. Every act of remembering occurs in the present, and the present has its own questions. A memory that once seemed to prove you were unloved may later reveal a parent who was frightened, limited, or overwhelmed. The event hasn't changed, but its position inside the self has. Frederic Bartlett understood this long before memory science had many of its modern tools. In his 1932 book, Remembering, he argued that recollection isn't literal reproduction. It's reconstruction shaped by organized patterns of expectation drawn from prior experience and culture. We don't retrieve every detail. We rebuild what seems to belong, and when pieces are missing, the mind often supplies coherence. That's why a memory can feel sincere and still be inaccurate. The mind isn't always trying to deceive us. It's trying to make the past intelligible from the standpoint of the present. This becomes even more complicated when remembrance belongs to a group. Families, religions, nations, and communities preserve certain names. They repeat certain injuries, honor certain victories, and sometimes remove whatever threatens the story they tell about themselves. Collective memory isn't stored in one brain. It lives in rituals, photographs, anniversaries, monuments, recipes, silences, jokes, and phrases repeated so often that nobody remembers who first said them. A family may keep telling the story of a grandfather who survived everything while forgetting what his survival cost everyone around him. A nation may remember a war as courage, while another remembers the same war as occupation. The past can be shared while its meaning remains fiercely divided. This is where memory begins to resemble narrative. In my work on narrative architecture, I make a distinction. Plot is what happens. Story is how what happens changes relationships. Memory is one of the mechanisms that keeps making that conversion. It takes an event and asks, what did it do to us? Who became protector? Who became traitor? Who was believed and who was forgotten? Memory doesn't only preserve what happened, it preserves the relational roles created by what happened. That's why changing a memory's meaning can feel like changing the self. You may have spent 30 years as the child who was abandoned, the sibling who failed, the spouse who stayed, or the survivor who never needed help. Then a letter's found. A relative finally speaks. You remember one sentence differently. Suddenly the old role no longer fits as cleanly. That can be freeing, but it can also be frightening. Identity will often preserve a painful continuity rather than tolerate an unexplained gap. Memory also protects belonging. People sometimes agree with the family's version of the past because disagreement carries a social cost. To remember differently may be treated as an attack or a betrayal. The person who says that isn't how it happened isn't merely correcting a detail. They may be threatening the structure that allowed everyone else to remain who they are. So collective remembrance always contains questions of authority. Who gets to name the event? Whose pain becomes official? Whose memory is called history, while someone else's is dismissed as bitterness or confusion? A group doesn't only survive by remembering, sometimes it survives by arranging memory. None of this means memory is worthless because it changes. A map can be incomplete and still guide us. A witness can be imperfect and still tell us something very real. The danger begins when we mistake reconstruction for recording and certainty for accuracy. Maturity asks us to hold memory with a kind of double respect. We honor what it carries while questioning what it's arranged. We should also notice what happens when the same memory returns in a different state. Fear may remember one childhood, grief remembers another. Compassion may uncover details that anger could never see. Different states make different decisions. They may also retrieve different versions of the past. That's why the memory available during despair should not be allowed to testify alone. Bring in other witnesses, documents, conversations, the body's response, and the person you were before the present moment narrowed the room. Memory preserves identity by continuously reconstructing it. It gathers what happened, what was felt, what was later understood, and what the present now requires. Then it gives us a self who appears to have been walking in one direction all along. But perhaps identity isn't the possession of one unbroken past. Perhaps it's the capacity to meet that past again without becoming permanently imprisoned by its first meaning. We don't remember because the past is still there. We remember because some relationship to it is still alive. Each time we return, we may preserve the old arrangement, or we may finally give it another shape. If this interlude made you reconsider the difference between what happened and the story memory built around it, make that known. Leave a rating or a review, not for recognition, for signal, so the past may inform us without continuing to govern us. Until next time, remember, you don't become what you feel, you become what you return to, and what you return to returns as you.